We're live.
Fantastic. How exciting.
So thank you everybody for joining the live stream. I have to say this was one of the more panicked ones because we've literally just arrived at the shipyard. We almost got lost. We walked in, we put our computer up, and Jasper Smith, founder of Arksen, it's very kind of you to spend some time with us today.
Oh, well, thanks, David, so much for coming. And well done. I mean, what an adventure getting here. So you're on our side already, which is great.
Yeah, it was an ordeal, mostly due to my own ignorance of the size of the Isle of Wight, which is a lot bigger than I thought. As I always do, I'm going to ask anybody who's watching just to confirm that they can hear okay, so that we know that the volume's working and the audio's working. I'm sure you'll tell me very quickly if it's not. But in the meantime, Jasper, we've literally just met, but I've read a lot about you. So can you start by telling us a little bit about your background and what possessed you to start building yachts?
Yeah, sure. So I started off as a sculptor. So I was always fascinated by form and structure and artistic endeavor, creative endeavor generally. And the only problem with that grand vision of life was that I was completely useless as a sculptor. So I was lucky enough to get a scholarship at the Henry Moore Foundation, which is like a really amazing place to study. But it didn't last very long. So I had to rethink what I did. And I went into the games industry. And this was right at the dawn of the sort of casual games industry. So you may remember when you had little feature phones that had games like Snake.
Yes. So this would have been mid-90s, late 90s?
Yeah, no, earlier, like mid-80s, really.
Right.
Yeah. So we started building these tiny little games, and then we built actually a really big business out of it. And I was very lucky in that we sold it, and then I was able to build a venture capital company out of that, and we did pretty well from there. But I think, at the end of the day, you live once, right? And you there's this sort of, anyone who loves to sail is in their heart a romantic person. They have this sort of sense of what's over the horizon. You look at the sunsets and you look at the ocean and you think, I'd love to get closer, I'd love to go further. And, I was lucky enough many years ago to spend about 9 months on a boat sailing from Sydney up to Alaska.
Wow. Sydney to Alaska?
Yeah, which was an amazing, wonderful journey.
How long did that take?
About 9 months in all.
Wow.
And it was just an extraordinary, I was quite young. It was myself and four friends. And it was one of those sort of forming experiences where you get to spend a lot of time, quite claustrophobic on a boat, obviously, for that long. You get to spend a lot of time thinking about what you want to do in life. And we saw some extraordinary things. We were one of the, obviously Russia's, so much horrendous stuff going on with Russia at the moment, and it's tragic what's happened in Ukraine. Obviously, when we were in Russia, it was just when communism was collapsing and capitalism was just trying to come through, and so there was complete chaos. And so we saw the whole Northern Fleet sort of sunk into the ocean. Anyway, it was an extraordinary trip, and I just always thought that one day I'd love to go back to that romance, back to that journey, back to the sort of sense of adventure and passion that sailing brings out in people, and so that was really the impetus for starting Arksen, is a memory of that trip, and specifically being in Greenland with my eldest son, and we were sat there on Ilulissat Glacier looking at this extraordinary ice cap, watching water gushing off it because of climate change, and just thinking, there's an awful lot to explore in the world whilst the world's going through these profound changes. And actually the best way of exploring the world is on a boat. And how many boats are there that are built really for complete off-grid exploration? And the answer to that was virtually nothing. And so that was really that sense of adventure, that sense of romance, that longing to explore the horizon were really the catalyst for setting the company up.
That's amazing. And actually, I have a lot of other questions I want to ask. But I'm thinking that in the video that we film tomorrow, I should probably satisfy my own curiosity and answer it. But the purpose of this live stream is for viewers to be able to ask their questions.
Right.
And there are so many. I think of all live streams, this is the one that has the most questions
I might need to put my belt
earliest on. So Penelope D. Wenman, thanks for all of your comments. I'm just looking for one that's a good question. She says there's a heat warning where she is.
Where is she?
I think she's in, yes, west coast of Canada.
Oh, right, yes.
So PST, west coast of Canada. But she says, on this subject of weather climates, how do Explorer yachts cover the polarities of tropical and Nordic waters and environments, and what special structure and equipment is needed to outfit each journey?
It's quite a technical question. I mean, I think that the nature of the equipment really depends on the location. So if you're going far north, you probably want pilots on board that can have got sort of experience with sort of managing ice and things like that. I mean, in terms of sort of general navigation equipment now, it's so advanced that I don't think there's any specialist requirements. Where I think it's really interesting is looking at the scientific programs that we run and what scientific work can be done. Because the purpose of Arksen wasn't just to build this fleet of yachts for wealthy people to go off and explore the world. It was really to try and equip scientists with the infrastructure so that they could go and begin to understand the ocean in a much more profound way. And I think if you look at ocean research, it's the least funded of all ecosystem research parameters, and it's if you look at it on a global basis, there's only 35 as of the David Attenborough launching, 35 national research vessels globally.
Is that right? 35.
That's it. So that's the extent of the government-owned research fleet.
Wow.
So it's virtually nothing.
Yeah.
On the other side, you've got hundreds of thousands of marine biologists trying to get onto the ocean, and so I think a lot of what we've been trying to do at Arksen is launch this Sea Time Pledge, where owners donate parts of the usage of the vessel to ocean research. And so I think that's where it becomes really interesting from an equipment and expertise point of view, is looking at sort of what equipment you need to be able to launch a 6,000 meter ROV, and how do you manage the tethers, and what do you need from a sampling perspective, and what do you need from an analysis perspective. So I think it's much more about the science operational program than it is about the basic navigation and things like that. However, the boats are seriously equipped in terms of stabilization, obviously recovery from capsize, that sort of stuff. Huge range, about 7,000 mile range on traveling at about 9
7,000.
Yeah.
Is that on the 85?
Yeah, that's just on the 85. Yeah, you can't do that on the smaller ones.
Yeah.
But on the 85,
not on the 45. I'll move on only because there's so many questions, and I want to cover as many as I can. Cliff Bradley says, I'm here. That's significant because he's also sent in like 9 questions, and we'll get to your
Cliff.
questions. We'll get to your questions in a little bit, Cliff. Rob, okay, I knew this question would come along. Robin C, can you ask Jasper why Arksens look so much like the Dashu offshore FPVs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at what Dashu did, I think it's he did some amazing work, really interesting, and it's tragic that he hung his clogs up and I'm not sure what he's doing. Hopefully he's enjoying his retirement, sailing one of his boats around. But I think the FPVs were a really profound concept, and I think with Arksen, we like all these things, I think you take inspiration from lots of different things. I think the design paradigms that we've put in place are very different to Dashu's. I think our design philosophy is very different. I think the way we expect the vessels to be used is quite different. I think the engineering around them is profoundly different, and then hybrids and that sort of stuff. I think I guess at our heart we see ourselves as a technology business. So we're about pushing the envelope on innovation. Really understanding what's coming down the road, how we can employ it, how we can embed it into the sort of systems we've got. So things like multiple forms of stabilization. As I said, these hybrid systems, looking at the sustainable economy and making sure that everything we're doing is either recycled or recyclable or repairable, so it has this sort of infinite use capability. So I think you can look at lots of reference points in the history of the naval or the marine industry, and you can see all sorts of components. And I think our job was really to take the best of what we could see, add to that with a whole new technology package around that. And there's tons and tons of innovation in this vessel or in these vessels. But I think it's more about what you do with the boat rather than what the boat is. The boat's a vehicle to get you from A to B.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this whole experiential ownership side of things is very powerful. So, we see ourselves, yes, as a boat builder, but really we see ourselves as an organization that's trying to be the ultimate adventure company. What we're trying to do is, give people the ultimate life, the ultimate experience that they can have by creating these sort of exemplar products. So the 85 is, if you look at it in auto terms, it's like the equivalent of a Bentley or a Rolls Royce. It's not an Audi or a Jaguar or a, or a VW. It's right at the top end of in terms of capability and in terms of the way it's designed, where it's built, things like that. So that's a given, but it's really how you package these things around experiences and things that I think really differentiates us.
So the aesthetics are similar, but that's pretty much where it ends.
I would say the aesthetics are again quite different. I think that we wanted to end up with a very modern, very contemporary design. So I think it's very different to the Dash U from an aesthetic point of view, other than the fact that it's aluminium. But you can look at lots of different boats that have come through, and I think you will find little bits of each in all of them. So I hope.
The car industry is very similar.
Absolutely,
I'll move on so I can get through as many questions as we can. Got to scroll back up here. Tim Evers, where do you get the energy from to live such an entrepreneurial life?
Yeah, look at me.
You look great.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think that you have to be an optimist, I think, in life anyway. And I think I'm very lucky in that I generally feel pretty optimistic about things, even though the world's in a pretty awful place, or a lot of it's in a pretty awful place. But optimism comes from hope, doesn't it? And energy and things like that. That's what gets us out of bed. So it's nothing other than that, unfortunately.
Now, Robin C, this is quite a deep question. It sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He says, can Jasper show us some proof of the MCA Cat 0 and being able to right itself when capsized?
I can't show you any physical proof. I think it's too expensive to do that. So it's basically modelled on a computer. So from a computer perspective or compute perspective, that's how it performs. So I certainly wouldn't want to put it to the test. I wouldn't want anyone to have to put it to the test. But yeah, that's what the analysis and the data shows.
And actually, computer simulations now in yachting are really advanced. I mean, people know by the time a yacht's launched what speed it will do, what the range is going to be, how it will react in certain sea states. Yeah. So it's fairly reliable, I think, to have.
I think it's really reliable. I mean, like I said, it's the sort of thing one hopes will never happen, and there may be situations where it doesn't. And I wouldn't want, nobody I think would want to guarantee these things as for people to go and experiment with. It's a very expensive asset to do that with. Yeah. But yeah, certainly the computer science, that's what it says. So that's about as good an answer as I can give you, I'm afraid.
Well, it's a good enough answer for me. Before we go on, can we have one of the questions from Cliff, please? I have Sonia here with us, who's got them all printed out.
With so much focus on the under 24-meter Explorer yachts, I saw Yacht Boy do an interview and mentioned plans for a yacht over 120.
Yeah.
How's this going, or is it not?
So this is a question, just in case you didn't hear, this is a question about a project for 120. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are several parts of what we're trying to do. So the first thing we talked about was this sort of experiential ownership. So we're trying to sort of make it much more than about owning a boat, make it bigger than that. And the second thing we're trying to do is have a new concept for ownership around syndicates, so that people can club together and buy weeks on vessels and things like that. And so we're very active in both of those. Because we're marketing boats, experiences, and syndicates in parallel, the inflow of inquiries is pretty extraordinary. And so within those inquiries, we have, I think, 3 or 4 people that are looking at much bigger vessels, and they range from sort of 38 meters upwards.
Wow.
So whether they will come off, I mean, I think at that level, they're not the type of vessels that we can go and build on spec. So they need to be customer-led projects. But I think what we're trying to do is very interesting in the industry. Our idea was to try and be the sort of North Star of the next generation of the marine industry. So, sustainability, experiential, new forms of ownership around a set of products that are really designed to go and do, pretty much anything anyone could think of doing. So, I mean, absolutely they're active projects. Absolutely we're focused on trying to deliver to the people that are interested in those. But I think it's a bit of a TBC to see whether, whether people come across the line or not. But hopefully.
Thank you very much. Anthony McNabb, one design idea I have for yachts, is it possible to have the master cabin in the place of the aft beach club? I don't think you have a beach club on the Arksens, do you?
No, not a beach club. We have a big locker full of tools and, bits and bobs.
Are you fairly flexible on the layout, though, if people want to change the layout that you propose to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the beauties of sort of being semi-custom, which these are, and building from aluminium, is that everything's very changeable. So the difference between, say, boat 1 and boat 2 is quite profound in the way the transom is set up. So boat 1 has a large transom door, floats down, so it's not a beach club, but it sort of gives you access to the ocean pretty easily. Boat 2 has a completely different philosophy, and so you can change it a lot. I mean, I've seen a lot of boats with a master cabin. It may not be the master cabin, but a cabin certainly in the lazarette. And absolutely, that would be possible on this boat. From a location perspective, I think it would work. It'd be quite small compared to where the master cabin is. And I think it's interesting on boat 1. What we've tried to do is put some other functionality into the layout, so that the master cabin has a study next to it. Quite often, I think on boats, people underestimate how much work we all do. Right, we're all 24-hour connected, and people who go off on these sort of amazing trips are not expected not to be in touch still. So I think having really good satcoms and a study on board, I think, and a library makes a lot of difference to that type of thing. I think the other thing is, we've got a dedicated laundry. That's very unusual on a boat that size. So there's some really interesting things, and absolutely, there's so much flexibility. People can chop and change. I mean, obviously the bulkheads are where the bulkheads are. So, but absolutely, we can put you a bed in the back.
Zipful, just lost a Zipful Klashka, is going to rephrase Penelope's question about going to cold environments and going to the tropics. Those are very different challenges for how you're going to feel comfortable on the boat. Is it possible to equip the yacht for both of those extremes?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to insulation and how the HVAC system works. So insulation, we've designed. It's interesting. We've been doing some work in Finland with cabins, which is completely an abstract way of thinking about boats. But in Finland, they have fantastic building regs because of the climatic changes that you get, and so insulation is very good. So, looking at some of those systems within the boat, we spent a lot of time on basically noise insulation and then environmental insulation. And the HVAC system actually, I think, was one of the most complex engineering challenges that the guys had, and we'll see how it performs. But it's been designed to get rid of as much condensation. A lot of these sort of glass house boats have a lot of condensation in.
Yeah.
So be interesting to see how well we've managed that. But our expectations are that we've completely over-engineered what we needed for that, and that will give you that scope to go from extremely cold temperatures, where actually what you want is high levels of insulation, and it to be warm and comfortable inside, versus you want it to be, if it's 45 degrees outside, you want the opposite. And a metal boat, obviously, it's a great conductor of heat. So managing that, it's been quite a challenge. But the insulation inside, I think, is pretty sophisticated for a boat like this.
Great, thanks. Mr. Boaty, understand building in aluminium for efficiency and lower weight, but for durability of a true explorer, would steel not be a better material? Easier to repair and stronger against ice and impact?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of an age-old argument, and I think you can look at aluminium from sort of lots of different perspectives. So I'm not sure I agree. I think aluminium has got great resilience, and it's super quick to repair. Really, and you can repair it pretty much anywhere. And obviously these vessels have welders on board, so you can repair it as you're going along, as long as it's not massively below the waterline. And I think you get so many other advantages with it. So the fact that it's super light for its density, and the fact that it's recyclable. So I think from our point of view, steel is obviously recyclable as well. But actually, if you look at, I think something like 70 or 80% of all aluminium that's ever been produced is still in circulation. So I love the fact that it just keeps going around. And I agree, in thick ice, I'm not sure you'd want to take one of these boats, they're not icebreakers, right? So, it needs to be clear that, there might be bergy bits that you would go through, but you would not be breaking ice with these. And I think aluminium gives you all of gives you the weight benefits, it gives you the recycling benefits at the end of life, it gives you the ability to buy aluminium. It's got high degrees of recycled aluminium in it at the source, and it gives you a framework that you can repair very easily. So could you do the same in steel? I think you could do a lot in steel, but I think it would be a lot heavier, and therefore it would be much less efficient. So your range might come down to 5,000 miles rather than 7. Be a bit cheaper maybe to build. But I think aluminium, you look at the trends in the industry, aluminium is really taking off.
I get a lot of questions on the YouTube channel, a lot of comments about ice breaking. And I think it is that romantic idea of taking a yacht anywhere, even being able to go right into the snow, into the ice. But then by the time you're doing that, that's very extreme exploring, isn't it?
Follow an icebreaker.
Yes, follow an icebreaker. That would be the way to do it.
Where you can, you can go, like Northwest Passage and things like that. I think it's some amazing adventures to have. Really spectacular places to go. And now's the time to go, right? It's sort of post-COVID,
absolutely
post all stuff. And then there's, it's like I said a minute ago, you live once, and so it's really about living your best life.
Absolutely. Vladimir Cherkashin says, it's a similar question. It's exactly the same question, actually. Sorry about that, Vladimir. Already answered that one. Why aluminium and not steel or fiberglass? I suppose it's worth exploring the fiberglass because people talk about fiberglass yachts as plastic fantastic, but actually modern composite is pretty robust. Is there any reason why you would not?
Well, I think there's a lot of innovation going on around composites and around sustainable composites and things like that, which is really interesting to see. I think from our perspective, it just feels too fragile in the environments that we want these vessels to be able to go to, and I've had a lot of fiberglass boats in the past, and I've had various run-ins with them in places that and I've damaged them, and it's been harder to fix, and it's taken longer to fix, and all that sort of stuff. So I think for an explorer boat, aluminium is about where it's at. As we said earlier, you might go to steel, but there's lots of dowsides from that. And aluminium is beautiful because it looks after itself as well. You haven't got to paint it; just oxidizes gradually. So you've got which you can't do obviously with steel. And
sure.
So it's lots of benefits.
Sure.
From a GRP point of view, we're building the 45 in composite.
Right.
So that would be our first composite boat.
Yeah.
And we have looked in the past at whether we build components of the 85s and the larger boats. I think if we were doing sort of a 38, something like that, we may well look at sort of the upper decks being some form of composite, just from a sort of a weight perspective. So it's not that we're not that we're anti-composite at all. I think it's just from a sustainability perspective, it's harder than aluminium at the moment. But it will get there over time.
Excellent. Before we go on to other questions, let's see if there's another one from Cliff. Oh, is it here? Okay, I probably need a password. I do need a password.
Keep Cliff hanging on.
All right, loads of questions, Cliff. Thanks for this. Oh yeah, okay. So you're gonna like this question. There is a question at the end of it. It says, Arksen has, of course, been compared all the time to a cross between the Daemon toy carriers and the Star Wars Imperial Star Destroyer. Who came up with your unique design that's so recognizable?
So it's interesting. So we did a lot of sketches, and we worked with this wonderful naval architect called Rob or Humphreys Yacht Design, Rob and Tom Humphreys, who just really grasped what we were trying to do. And so I would get, I had some back of the envelope sketches that were rudimentary, to say the least, and I had a few things that I had seen in the auto industry and aviation industry that I was interested in, a few things in the marine sector, and and they were just really able to interpret what we were aiming for and what our vision was, and they crafted a range of vessels, and then we decided to start with the 85 because that one looked awesome.
Yeah, it did actually, and my personal favourite, I love the 65. I love the lines of the 65.
Yeah, I mean the 65 has been really interesting as a journey because, I have to say when I first saw it, I was quite unsure of it because I was, when you see really early renders, you're like, the aesthetics, as a sculptor, as I think like a visual person, so I was like looking at it as a piece of sculpture, I was like, I'm not sure. And then, it's been iterated and changed, and we've done a lot of work with it. And I think it's awesome now. But it's funny, isn't it, in a product development cycle, how you start with something and you refine it and edge it. And so much of it just comes down to how a few lines are worked through. And that sort of start, who was it? Pininfarina or something. When he did his Ferraris, and he did the Mini, didn't he? Who did the Mini? No, he did the Mini. No, Iggy, whatever his name was, did the Mini. But it's just crafting those lines makes all the difference. 65 is great.
Moving on, Penelope's just subscribed to your YouTube channel. Robin C, what's the smallest possible boat that can accommodate a small three-seater submersible? And what sort of crane would you use? Are you getting many requests to houses?
We looked quite a lot on boat one. We looked at submersibles a lot, and it's not the deck space or the crane that's the issue. It's just the support systems that you need in terms of oxygen and I can't remember. Is it nitrogen? I can't remember what you need actually. But it's the support systems around operating the sub, right? And then the skills that you need on board. So it's not dissimilar from operating a helicopter. There's a whole load of regulation around it. So from a logistical point of view, yes, you can get a on the back of the 85, you can get either a U-boat's work or a Triton sub, the smaller versions of their sub. You can drunk it into the water. You can get, I think they can go down 300 meters or something like that. That sort of range. So you can do it. The compromise is you probably lose half of the lazarette in terms of infrastructure.
And I didn't know that. So you need the supply of oxygen as well.
Yeah, I mean, it may be different. Yeah, it's a while ago, so it may be different parameters, different things that you need for different types of sub. But yes, certainly to be able to recharge the tanks and stuff, you need onboard gas to be able
So it's not a question of just having the space and a big enough crane. You also need to think of all the other things.
But I mean, I think what's also interesting is a lot of really cool ROVs you can get now. So we've been looking at that a lot, because I share that desire to get a view underwater, and from a research perspective and things like that. I think an ROV with super high res cameras, with grabbers and things, you can get a package now that's 20k, 30k, this sort of size. That's really interesting to me, to be able to take it down 1,000 meters and see what's down there. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think there's so much beauty under the sea, and probably by only ever staying on top of it, we miss out on so much stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things that we set up at Arksen was a foundation called 10% for the Ocean, and the idea was that, as I said earlier, the problem with ocean conservation is it's the least funded of all ecosystems. So there's just no money going in. So 10% for the Ocean I'm very proud of it. It's this alliance now of 70 plus major ocean conservation organisations around the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so that plugs into Arksen. So if you own an Arksen vessel, you get the benefit of this huge sort of knowledge base of all these marine scientists and organisations trying to do great work. And my hope is that, as the fleet becomes bigger, the people who own that fleet, work and do stuff with some of these organisations. But I mean, just extraordinary projects going on, like trying to work out mechanisms to get coral regrowth to happen at a profound level rather than just at a local level.
My eyes were open to that. A few months ago, I met Dr. Sylvia Earle.
Oh, amazing!
Wow.
Lucky you.
Wow,
she must have been.
She's incredible.
Yeah, she's 84 now.
She's 86. She flew from San Francisco to Monaco to do a presentation, and then got on the plane and flew all the way back again.
She's a complete hero. I mean, she is utterly extraordinary. Really.
And actually, anybody watching who's not watched Mission Blue on Netflix, watch it. It is the most incredible documentary. Incredible. Moving on. Robin's asked for a brochure. He's emailed and asked for a brochure, but it seems that the brochure's not been sent. So anyway, if you can send, I'll tell you what, Robin, why don't you put
ping us your email and I'll
ping the email. Either you can DM me on Instagram if you like, or you can DM you have an Instagram channel as well, I'm sure that and they will send you a brochure through.
Yes. Have we got his email? Or send me an email at jasper@arksen.com, and then I'll send you one.
Tim Evans says, what do your clients tell you as to why they've chosen Arksen over another Explorer brand?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I think that just the pure capability of the vessel, I think, is quite standout when you look at it. But I won't go through all of the engineering around it. But I think it is, as I said earlier, it's an exemplar of how you could build an Explorer vessel.
Yeah.
That means it's got a cost to match that, and obviously you can de-spec components of it. But the basic spec is super high, super high level. I think there's one reason, which is a product reason. I think the second reason is that this whole concept around experiential ownership, and that you can do so much more with these vessels. So it's not about, a lot of boat companies sell you a boat, and then other than being there for parts and things, that's the end of the journey. Whereas this is about a completely engaged community that's working to the benefit of the ocean, so helping with research, going off on extraordinary trips. With the Explorers Club, which is the organisation that we have internally, run by this guy called Ollie Hicks, who is a 3-time world record holder. He was the youngest guy to ever row across the Atlantic.
Oh, wow.
He's quite an amazing guy. run by him. So with that Arksen Explorers Club, essentially what they do is they curate and manage trips and expeditions. So if you want to go to, I don't know, the Antarctic or to the Galapagos or somewhere like that, it's very hard to do. So you need permits and things. So, we've got a team of people that curate all of that stuff. So get the permits, get the permissions, work out who are the best local guides. And these things take years to build, because if you want a network of explorers around the world who are really good, tried, tested guides, from mountain climbing to, to ocean work, it's a ton, it takes a lot of work. So we've got a couple of things that I think are really interesting. So I don't know if you've seen 14 Peaks, the climbing film with Nims, where he climbed the 14 highest peaks in the world. He climbed in 7 months.
Wow.
I think the other guy who did it, Messner, did it over 14 years or something like that. So organising trips to the Himalayas with him. So it's not sailing, but it just gives you an idea of where we're trying to go. As an adventure brand, we want the vessels to be, the vehicle that gets you somewhere, and but it's then about what you do when you're there. So things like that. We've just done last November we did a big safari trip to Laikipia in Kenya through a whole series of big, massive conservancies. So I think it's a really interesting skill set to have at the heart of a marine business. Is this sort of fully fledged expedition business that can organise going up Everest, going up K2. Going on deep dives down into the ocean, free diving, backcountry skiing, small boat cruises.
I completely get what you're saying, because actually owning the yacht is only half of it. If you really want to explore, you got the yacht. What are you going to do with it now? You need to be able to tap in on that kind of expertise.
Absolutely, and it's so time consuming. So most captains, you have an owner and a captain. Captain's like, where do you want to go? And he goes, I want to go to Norway. That's a big job in its own, But when you get to Norway, you want, what are the 500 things that, or 200 things that you might want to do? You might want to go diving with orcas, or you might want to go backcountry skiing and do that. And all of that takes organisation and time. Anyway, so that's the second reason. The third reason I'll just touch on very quickly is certainly looking at the clients that we are engaged with at the moment. Their families their kids in particular are now of a very different mindset. So you've got the sort of, the sustainability, the climate change issues that, humanity is facing as a whole. And that upwelling of responsibility that children feel is being felt by parents. And so, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but a white plastic boat in the Med feels very different to a child than a fully off-grid aluminium explorer boat. And if you bake on top of that the science programs and all the rest of it that we do, all the conservation work that Arksen funds, this network of science-based organisations that we support, what we're trying to do is say to this community, look, it really isn't about owning the boat. The boat, is 1% of it's like it's the tip of the iceberg. It's actually all of the investment in Arksen has gone into building this infrastructure underneath that we hope kids will be really proud of. And that's in the day. Like, I look at my kids; they badger the hell out of me. They're like, "Oh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing this?" And when we set Arksen up, which is a family business basically, it was on the basis that we all wanted to feel unified around one vision, one view of the world, and that was a sort of planet first try thing. Now, there's no perfect, right? We're still building big boats that burn diesel, but with the hybrid systems, you can get about somewhere between 10 and 15 hours of silent running, depending on what systems you've got on. And with the solar arrays, you've got a lot of solar capacity coming in. So there's no perfect yet, but I think using recyclable materials, using hybrid propulsion systems, etc., I think we'll get there. But
it pushes the whole thing along in the right direction a step at a time.
So that's the third reason.
It just reminded me of the fact that the brokerage I work with, Northrop and Johnson, was bought, I think 2 years ago now, by MarineMax, were a huge business in the United States, and they built their business selling little 30-foot, 35-foot sea rays. They sell bigger stuff now.
Yeah.
But as a part of their business, and one of the reasons they became so big, they realized that people in the States, in Florida, would buy a little 35-foot sea ray, put it at the back of their boat, at the back of their house, and then go, what are we going to do with it now? So they started to develop events for all of the owners, so that the owners could all go to the Bahamas together. They could have a party. They have something called the Aquapalooza. And by making it an experiential business, they've grown into a huge business. And what you're doing is taking that and putting it on a steroids on a global level, where now, okay, you might dream of having an Explorer, you may have the financial means to buy an Explorer yacht, but it really is half the battle. You need normalization to them.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good, a friend of mine runs Harley Davidson, and I think Harley's a really interesting business model for a marine business. So it's completely community driven, right? And it's basically, there's this sort of, community has been grown over 100 years, handed from father to son to daughter, et cetera, and it's grown and grown. And there's a complete passion around the culture that's there, that goes from, where you stay, what you wear, what you ride, how you behave.
It's almost like a religion, isn't it? It's like
it is. I'm not sure we'll get, Arksen to be a religion. But I mean, my hope is, multi-generations down the road, I hope it is. But I think those businesses that understand community and sort of worship community in a sense, and are driven by communities, I think do very well. And Patagonia is a great example of a really commercial business that started off small family business, still a family business, that understood a zeitgeist, but didn't understand it from a marketing perspective, just from a passion perspective. They loved the mountains. They wanted to build great gear. They wanted to build that gear so it was aimed at the 1%, not the 99%. And by focusing on the 1%, they became brilliant, and they became a North Star in the same way we're hoping to become a North Star in the marine industry. So I think there's lots of really interesting ways of looking at the business generally today.
Fantastic. Let's see what other questions that we have. I'll have to scroll up a little bit. Yachts trail camera points out that if you have a sub on the boats, you also need crew who know how to operate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Patrick Abbas, who's a very regular follower and viewer, he says, you still owe us an interior tour of the Arksen, or did I miss it?
Oh, yes. We haven't done that, I don't think. It's interesting. So we're at the yard at the moment, and the interior on the first boat is just going in. So maybe we could do that. That'd be great. Yeah.
Excellent. In fact,
get you back over.
That's the reason there's not been a tour yet, because there is no interior just yet to show.
I think it's it's like, I think in a month or so, it'd be interesting. It's all laid out, so we'll see. But I'm excited. I'm super excited to see it myself.
Anthony McNabb asks whether you can go total electric. I mean, for example, at the silent yacht catamarans, which are pretty much totally electric with a couple of generators. Do you think that's something that you could do with Arksen?
I think it would be tough. I mean, I think that getting enough solar capacity on that, on a monohull design would be tough. And I think really, I guess it's always going to be an argument, but I think in the sort of locations that we're trying to take these vessels, you're probably better off with a monohull. And so could you do it pure electric? I think you'd really struggle at the moment. I think what you can do is start looking at hydrogen. Obviously you've got lots of problems with storage, hydrogen generation. There's a few small hydrogen generators now that are coming on the market. So that I think, as I said earlier, at our heart, we like to think of ourselves as a sort of innovation and technology business. And, I would like nothing more than a hydrogen-powered boat that could go forever. I love the idea of breaking the rules of physics and perpetual motion and all the rest of it. But, I think for this type of vessel, we're not there. But I think where we are is sort of hyper efficiency. So, again, I don't want to I'll get shot for saying this, but I think in the original calculations, and there may be some changes there may have been some changes over the last year or so, but I think in the original calculations, to drive the 85 forward at something like 5 knots required the power of a few kettles, 2 or 3 kettles or something like that. And I'm sure that's changed. It's not nearly as efficient now because it's a bit wider and stuff. But it's the hull is super efficient, and I think that's where you go. I think you go super efficiency. Hybrid, I think, is a really interesting technology to use, particularly around where in polar regions. Lots of the fjords are things. Not at this size, but for a bigger boat, you would need to be running pure electric in the fjords and things. At some point, that will come down to this size of vessel as well. So I think the idea of having this silent running capability, 10 to 15 hours, that type of thing, I think that's really probably where it's at for this type of boat at the moment. I think originally we looked at putting a much larger battery pack in so that you could get double the silent running, but then you're pushing the battery pack through the water constantly.
Yeah.
So from an efficiency perspective, so it's about
a trade-off, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding those balances. And then the other thing I think is looking at the generator stack that we've got. So we run 3 generators. So at low, at slow speeds and things like that, you can just run one generator at sort of max torque, and then build in other generators as you ramp up power or the hotel load gets bigger and things like that. So I think it's about just all these balances. I mean, building boats is all about compromise, and I think it's silent running capability, fantastic for going in and out of port and conservation areas. I think the step diesel approach, your step generator approach, I think is really elegant. It's because you're only ever using the power that you really need and stuff like that.
And I suppose as technology progresses, then we'll see the Arksens.
Yeah, look, we've done some initial work on looking at things like fuel cells and stuff like that. But we'll have to see how that pans out.
I'm going to go back to some of Cliff's questions. Do you mind powering up the computer again? And in fact, Cliff, funnily enough, Cliff has just said, talking about propulsion, that was one of my questions. I'll see if I can find it now, Cliff. I'll tell you what, Cliff, put it back up there again because I can't find where that question was. So I'll just read another one. Right. So Cliff also asks, are there any Arksens on the charter market? So I'll rephrase that. Do any of your clients plan to put their yacht on the charter market?
So I think not that I'm aware of. However, there's I talked a little bit about the concept of these syndicates. And so the idea that we are putting into the market is, it's co-ownership of a vessel. That vessel may be based in somewhere like the Mediterranean, and you can swap your membership or your allocated weeks with somebody who's got one in Australia or in America or whatever. And the idea is to build this sort of this over time, this fleet where people can sort of swap time and go and enjoy different areas on more or less the same vessel. So we're doing that. I think the other thing that's really interesting is looking at the boat clubs that we're looking at launching. So we've got a range of small boats that are coming out that we'll announce at the Southampton Boat Show. And those small boats, I think, is a really interesting market because if you look at it from my starting point was how do you make a really cool, really exciting ocean adventure brand and then make it accessible? And obviously we started with the hardest products to build. The most technically advanced 85, I think, probably in the world, leisure boat, I suspect. And then it's about coming, yes, we can go, higher than that and go up. But it's also about coming down and saying, well, how do we bring the price points of these things down so that, for people who are just interested in boating, who want a day boat or a weekend boat, there's a product for them too. And so my ambition ultimately would be able to go from a canoe, all the way up to 45 meter super yacht. But I would love the idea of someone who loves fishing to have one of our canoes be sat there on in a lake, in the Great Lakes or something like that, fishing away, and still feel this sense of community and sustainability and belonging to this brand. So, yeah, I mean, the small boat market is very interesting to us, and the idea of having, you look at what Brunswick did with the Freedom Boat Club, I think that's really interesting to us. So we're doing a lot of work on an adventure version of that using some of our boats. So I think there's lots of these different models. I don't know if that answered the question completely.
It's kind of an exciting time to be talking to you, really, because we're right at the beginning of the Arksen story, aren't we? With the 285s launched this year. Will they be launched or the end of this year?
Yeah, they'll be launched. I think one is late. Yeah, one is in December, one's in January, I think. Yeah. So two coming out this year. A 45 would be launched in 10 weeks or something like that. So we've got three boats coming out now, and then next year we should put probably 4 to 5 65s in build, which we'll do on, partly on stock, and we'll start
4 to 5 next year.
65s, yeah.
Wow.
So we'll just build. I mean, hopefully we'll. I think there's demand for a lot more than that, to be honest. But I think we'll start building those on stock, from a stock perspective, and then, then we're looking at whether we start building 85s on spec. Because I think the issue with all these semi-custom projects is that they take a long time. So from somebody's first interest in a vessel, then they sign a contract, and then an 85 is a 14-month build program or something like that. So it's a long time, A lot of people just want to go, So it's like, well, how do you compress that? The only way you can compress that is by investing in the business. And so we're very lucky that we're well backed. So from a capital perspective, we can, we have options that maybe a lot of shipbuilders don't. And as I said, we've invested massively in, experiential and all that sort of stuff, building all these what we might call wrappers, if you like, around the business. So I think as a business, the marine industry has been so catastrophically underinvested in that there's been very little desire for innovation, because innovation costs money and burns hours and stuff like that. So being able to come at the industry with a slightly different view, a very long-term play. So as I said, we look at this as sort of multi-generational rather than, a business that can be built over the next few years. So if you start looking at these businesses in sort of 50-year cycles, it's quite interesting. It takes a lot of the stress out of building a business. You look at it like that. Whereas all the other businesses I've built are sort of, how do you build a globally scalable SaaS software business in a month?
And you're looking at an exit strategy.
And you're trying to get out.
By the sound of it, you've got no interest in an exit strategy. This is a legacy. It's something that you want to create. Yeah. I love that.
So that's interesting.
Fantastic. Let's move on. There's a lot of people who want to explore the world, leaving comments.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, this is a really good question, and it's worth spending a moment with. Robin C says, "How is syndicate ownership different from the maligned concept of timeshare?"
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that at a conceptual level, I mean, timeshare. Let's sort of start with timeshare. Timeshare obviously got a really bad rap because it was selling, one-bedroom flats in Benidorm, and the proposition, unless you really wanted to go to Benidorm, and when they would take you into a room, they'd get you drunk, and then you'd sign on a bit of paper.
It was the sales tactic as much as anything that was maligned, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our sales team are good, but they haven't yet got. They're not. So I think I guess from my perspective, the difference between a timeshare, which is entitlement to go into a flat or a house or a villa for a couple of weeks in a set location, versus joining an adventure syndicate, it's the adventure piece that I think really differentiates it. And I think the other thing is the fact that you can, go off on these extraordinary adventures, and then you can, swap your position in, the Med for 2 weeks in the Caribbean or 2 weeks in the Arctic or whatever. I think that's a really interesting idea. And then these are serviced, right? So these boats are not. It's not just that you've bought 2 weeks and you get a key and then you go and press start and go. So they're fully crewed, they're fully victualled. Everything is there for you. So it sort of feels. I think it will feel very luxurious, very sort of hosted, very embracing for people that want to go off on adventures. And so the spirit of it really is, these boats are expensive, and they were designed, as I said earlier, like Yvonne Kushnard said, for the 1%. And because they're expensive, they're pretty inaccessible to a lot of people. So the Syndicate really said, well, if you can have this magical life, how do you open it to as wide a group of people as possible? And I think the last thing that's different about it is just legally how it's structured. So essentially, what you're buying is shares in a company that owns the vessel. So you actually own, unlike timeshares where you basically have a lease to use.
Yeah. But you never have ownership.
You never have ownership, and the landlord owns the land and the building. In the Syndicate scenario, whoever the customer is physically owns the asset. So they're free then to buy and sell it to anybody else, to whoever else they want to. And then, we would obviously offer a marketplace for the trading of those Syndicate shares. But I think it's, it's a really interesting space. And I think there's, over the next 20 years, I can't imagine many people would opt to own an entire vessel unless they had something very specific that they wanted to do with it. Yeah. So it'd be interesting. I think there's going to be a very profound shift in that. So I think being an early mover, really understanding, how the legals work, and understanding what the core proposition is. So do you buy into a Syndicate because you want a boat, or do you buy into a Syndicate because you want experiences, or do you buy into a Syndicate because you want to make films or do all this other stuff? So I think getting to the zeitgeist of why that's going to become interesting, I think is a really interesting commercial point that we've given a lot of thought to.
Thank you very much. Anthony McNabb. Actually, we'll do this one. I'm sure we'll do this one, and then sadly, no more. What stabilizers do yachts have?
So we've got two electrical forms of stabilization, mechanical forms of stabilization. So we've put big gyros. So, and again, it's customer choice, right? So boat 2 has a very different philosophy. So boat 1, it's like with all these things, it's a little bit of an experiment, right? So you can't get two companies that sell different types of stabilization to work together very easily, right? So the guys who sell gyros have a very different philosophy to the guys who sell fins, right? And so if you say to them, oh, we want to put both on, they're like, oh, well, how does that work? Yeah. So on boat 1, we've put big gyros and big fins.
Oh, yeah, both.
Yeah. So, and the fins are oversized and the gyros are pretty much oversized. So it'd be really interesting to see, how stable it is. But the idea was to create a platform that was really stable for filmmaking, because with boat 1 has a very, I can't say much about it, but it has a film that it's making over the first couple of years with a very globally recognized conservation advocate who's not quite as old, a bit older than Sylvia Earle. So I think it'd be interesting. It'd be amazing to see what comes out of that. But one of the prerequisites of this platform was that it was super stable for filmmaking, and that's why it's got really large rear decks. So on boat 1, very unencumbered rear decks. So rear decks is about I can't remember exact size, but it's large enough to land really big drones and multiple drones simultaneously, and launch ROVs and stuff like that. So the stabilization and the and being able to sort of hold position was key to being able to A, make this film, and B, launch ROVs and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a more traditional stabilization system, which is this idea of flopper stoppers, which Steve Dashew had, which I loved on his design. He had these really old traditional sort of energy dampening tools, and there's something beautiful about just how simple that is. I mean, obviously no use at all when you're underway, but at anchor, zero energy. But yeah, so does that answer that question?
Very super interestingly.
But the thing is, you can't get, if you say to these stabilization manufacturers, if we wanted to work together with, how would that work? They're a bit like, it's quite tricky. But I think they've all done a really good job.
That was absolutely amazing. Well, tomorrow we'll be, as you know, we'll be filming the shipyard. We'll be showing the viewers everything that's going on here, giving more information. I feel now like I've got a much better grounding as well into what the company's all about. So I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to publishing it. So thank everybody for tuning in, for your questions.
Thank you so much. It was really a delight to meet you, and thanks so much, as you said, for all the questions and interest in Arksen. And if you've got any more questions, we're here anytime.
Great. Thanks very much, Jasper. That was absolutely amazing. Thanks. Wow, amazing.